Hey everybody, Tim here with today's episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Season 6, Episode 23, Prophet and Lace. So, third episode in a row that I'm really, I feel like Season 6 has really taken a dip. And I'm just not really liking this episode as well. And this episode has kind of been talked about how some people feel like it's the worst episode of Deep Space Nine, which I don't know if it's necessarily that bad, but it's pretty bad. So it was directed by Alexander Siddig, the actor who plays Dr. Bashir, and that's fantastic. He does a great job directing. And so the theory is the writers for this episode wrote this episode as a joke. Like, it was supposed to be a very funny episode, and it was because it's a Ferengi episode. Most Ferengi episodes are supposed to be pretty funny because they're caricatures. And so the thought was the writers wrote this episode as a joke, but Alexander Siddig directed it, and Armin Shimmerman, who plays Quark, also acted this episode very seriously. So you have two very contrasting concepts going on at the same time, and the whole episode basically just collapsed upon itself. So the premise of the episode is that nobody can contact Ferenginar, and so Rom is convinced that the Dominion has taken it over for whatever reason. Well, Grand Nagus Zeke shows up, or former Grand Nagus Zeke, and Moogie show up, Quark and Rom's mom. And it turns out that Zeke has introduced basically a new law saying that women can wear clothes, and that this will introduce women to the population because they're 53%. They'll start doing money, they'll start trading, they'll start earning profits, they'll start leaving the house, etc. And when all of this happens, basically the Ferengi culture just collapses, and Brunt is promoted to the new Grand Nagus, or acting Grand Nagus. And so they have to call 400 different Ferengi who are basically the chair, because they're going to vote on either the Zeke or Brunt. And let's see, who is it? It's Rom, I think Nog is in there, and Quark and Moogie, and they're calling hey, are you gonna side with Zeke? And nobody does. Finally, one person agrees to come to Deep Space Nine and basically side with them. And so for somehow or another, Moogie ends up having a heart attack because Quark says she's the worst thing that ever happened to Ferenginar. And so Quark has to have a whole sex change to convince this Ferengi to side with Zeke. And it just becomes this giant kind of joke, which I can see where the writers were coming from. But, I mean, it either had to be a complete joke or complete seriousness, and this episode tried to do both, and it just didn't work. So we see Quark as a female, and he's physically altered, and he's chemically altered, so he's emotionally just all over the place. And Brunt shows up, and we see Quark take off his clothes to prove he's a woman. This whole episode was just kind of a mess. It's really hard to even critique this episode because it was so all over the place. And, the episode starts with Quark trying to force this Dabo girl into basically being a prostitute. He's forcing her into it. If you don't do it, I'm going to fire you. And then by the time we get to the end of the episode, he's, on her side because he's still chemically unstable and emotionally unstable. And he's I'm sorry, you're going to get a raise. And he's crying. And I don't know, this whole episode was just a hot mess to me. So for those who have seen this one, what did you guys think? Because I don't know, I really don't know what to think about this episode because it was so all over the place. So go ahead, let me know in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time for Time's Orphan.